So, John, here we are on the magic island of Lanzarote in the Canary Islands, which has a resident population of only about 250,000, about the size of Barnsley, near where we are, but a visitor population of 5 million every year. And we've been all over the island, but we haven't really visited the tourist places yet. There's still time for that. I thought we'd talk briefly about how in the stillness we make friends with differences. There are all sorts of... This island has got very different spaces. It's got the very busy towns and villages, the tourist resorts, but it's also got its wild spaces, the Tim and Fire, the volcanoes. And you've just come back from a little walk, and you said something. You said you'd found your perfect spot behind the church. What was your perfect spot?
I'm going to answer in a rather roundabout way. Some time ago, somebody sent in a comment asking where I got this brown pullover from, a cardigan from, saying he liked it and where could he get one like it. Well, I tried to answer him on the, as you can usually to comments, but for some reason I couldn't get through on it. But I hadn't forgotten that question, and I'll answer it now, because this cardigan was actually knitted by hand by my mother probably about 50 years ago. It's one of the elbows needs darning, but apart from that, as you can see, it looks as good as new. Now, why do I sort of start with that little story? While Phil was just getting the focus and the microphone right, I was sitting here holding the wire of the microphone between my first finger and thumb. And as I watched this, I felt the completely all-sufficient strength and comfort preparing me to deal with whatever question Phil might throw at me, so that I could be quite confident with the reassurance that this utter simplicity of just watching carefully what is held between my finger and thumb is really all you need. Mother knitted for all the family throughout her life. For most of my life, I hardly knew what a bought woolly was. This applied to my father and my sister, and herself, of course. And knitting, it was a very common pastime for a woman years ago. When the day's work was done, she'd sit quietly. This was before television, of course. Sit quietly by the fire, maybe in the winter, and knit. And it's really a perfect meditation, because it holds the attention precisely onto what you are doing. Just as I was holding the wire and feeling that peace and sort of contentment that arises from just simply being present. Well, now, I've just had nearly 2 weeks holiday in Lanzarote, and we've seen and done many, many things. What does it all add up to? Well, this morning I was, Phil was busy, and I went out and walked, and I found behind the church, which was locked, an abandoned field, and I walked over it, and you won't be surprised to hear that because I'm a farmer, I felt that sort of instinctive response to earth beneath my feet.
I might point out I was busy making soup with my hands, perfectly at peace.
Well, anyway, he didn't want me around, so I took myself off on my own. I sat there on a stone, and I thought of the many people probably who'd worked this land before me who similarly had sat on a stone and got their breath back and just looked out over their work. And it felt so just complete happiness. Happiness comes from such simple things, doesn't it? And we so often forget it and look all over the world of exotica, of one thing and another, to stimulate the senses, in the name of enjoyment, entertainment, interest. And all these things, no doubt, are effective in their time, but of course they all pass, don't they? You holiday for a fortnight, then you go home again. And I wonder what it is we remember most from our holidays. The excitement of friends and drinking and eating and seeing new sights? Or was it just those moments sitting in the sunshine and seeing and doing nothing really, but just watching the waves? So I've wandered so far away from your question, Phil, I must ask you to remind me what it was.
I was reflecting on the fact that there are many different types of places on this island. How in our stillness, how do we enjoy the variety of these places?
Well, of course, we always think it's something we do, isn't it? How do we join it up? How do we reconcile? We can't get away from this me at the centre of spiritual work, trying to achieve something, trying to learn something, and thereby take a step nearer God. I couldn't possibly answer a question of how do we use stillness to reconcile differences, because when you come to stillness, the differences themselves just fade away. There aren't any. And also, there's no me to think it needs to reconcile anything. See, progress in spirituality is nothing we do. Now, I remember being told that many, many years ago as an early student of meditation, and I found it virtually impossible to understand. What does it mean? It's nothing to do. One's whole focus on what must I do to get nearer God? What must I do to become, to find whatever it is you're looking for? And how many years does it take to find that this insatiable need to do something is really what gets in the way? Well, perhaps I better qualify that, because of course the first, the primal desire to move in this direction, however we express it, I suppose could be interpreted as a form of doing. It may lead you to a bookshop, or it may lead you to a certain person who you feel could help you. Um, but this world of differences, it stays with us for a long, long, long time. I suppose it's fairly easy to reconcile these differences out in the world between it's the differences within ourselves that really persist. Our own divided minds. One way of, chopping and changing from one thing to another, never entirely satisfied, always searching. Almost anything that just brings that restlessness to peace is going to take us in the right direction. Like mother knitting, I don't think she had ever heard of meditation, never thought about it. And yet people have been meditating instinctively since the beginning of time, haven't they? Something as natural as breathing, just straightening your back. That is, if you're working with a bent back, as I usually was, just straighten up, lean on your tool and look at the horizon and come to rest, don't you? You don't have to call it meditation or anything complicated like that. It's just natural, isn't it? Common sense.
We visited a friend, Zana, at the Amatista Retreat Centre with her lovely garden. She gave us a personal guided tour of her fruit and veg patch, well, more than a patch. We asked her in passing, of all the practices, she has all sorts of different groups and therapies and shaman this and holistic that coming through Amatista. And we asked her, innocently out of interest, which practice she found most helpful. And do you recall what her answer was?
I certainly do recall what she said. She said taking her dogs around the garden in the early morning. I laughed when she said that. And actually, it's absolutely right, and it totally echoes my own attitude to all these alternative methods of approaching God. I mean, God bless them. They give. No doubt they're helpful to various people at various times. When I look back over my own long life, I've at least touched most of them myself. They're not unknown to me, but usually a short acquaintance was enough. I came back like Zana to my equivalent of just taking the dogs for a walk or just sitting quietly on a stone looking out over my fields. I was thinking really after that, there's a passage of St. Paul where he says, all things are permissible, but not all things are to our benefit. And I think that just about sums up that see, this stillness is total allowance, isn't it? You may not be surprised to know that for me this stillness is a very significant step towards the presence of God. And you see, God is described as most merciful. Now, he makes allowance for all our human whims and fancies. We can do, say, or think whatever we like. But of course, as everything is lawful, it has a consequence, for better or worse. All things are permissible, but not everything is to our benefit. And it seems that the long process of life is to sort some of this out. We try all sorts of things, and some of them remain with us, but most we just pass. We taste and pass on to something else. Simplicity. Most of us end up probably rather more simple than when we started.
After our meditation with Zana in her lovely kitchen yesterday, we took to humming and chanting and singing. So all these various different practices, John, different ways of expressing oneness, but not necessarily in silence or stillness. Well, certainly in stillness, but not necessarily in silence.
Well, again, all things are permissible, and in the great variety of humankind, different people like different things, don't they? Some people like to talk, and others like to be quiet. All things are permissible, and we usually end up with the things that we like best. Again, perhaps because I'm naturally a countryman, I've referred to before on these videos the biblical advice to put not your trust in man or in the works of man, and this has been my life experience, really, that I've never found a person in this life that I wanted to follow. And although I received very good instruction in the School of Meditation, and I've never found better, really. I've never found an organization that I particularly wanted to belong to. I've always felt the company of nature was sufficient for me. My little brothers, the stars. At least after I'd seen this pyramid the other day, it was a lovely moonlit night. I came out and sat on a bench and looked at the stars and thought, thank God for my little brothers up there. They really, so if I can trust them, they speak to me with a sort of simple completeness that people just don't.
None of these long-winded liturgies or chantings.
No, that's not my scene at all. It's a funny thing, that many people have been turned off the church because of the wordiness of the church and its long, complicated dogmas. And I was thinking, all this plethora of alternative approaches to spirit that there are around now are just making the same mistake, aren't they? They're just getting bogged down in all their own differences, and almost too many. It's getting so complicated. God knows how anybody chooses their way through them. That's why, if anyone can heed what I say and can follow my advice to go off somewhere by yourself and look at simple things like just the sky, the earth. If you feel any sort of comfort there, I'd follow your instinct and go again and compare that to what you get from people, and you may find which you prefer. It may help you to discriminate. If you go from one person to another or one teaching to another, you probably miss out the most important teaching of all, which is nature. Just simple common sense of nature. Personally, I'd rather be present and just feel the completeness of being here now. The trouble is with delving into the past that you forget to be present, and then you lose the presence of God. And when you lose that, you can fill your mind with no end of ideas about the past and future, but you lost the most important thing. So all things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial.
I'm reminded of the Groucho Marx quote once more. I wouldn't want to belong to a club that would have me as a member.
Well, there's a lot of truth in that. I find an echo in that. Yes, it's really quite, I know it's quite offensive to a lot of people, isn't it, who at least have some sort of strong sense of identity with some aspect of the world, when other people show disinterest in it or prefer to go off on their own. I'm afraid I've caused quite a bit of offence in my life by doing that, but I really have this completeness of just being present in the now, which is usually most easy to do without other people's interruption. Because so often other people do interrupt it. They always feel they've got to say something, or do something, or make some clever comment. But actually just to be this utter simplicity of being still, here now, present. It's complete, isn't it? It doesn't matter whether there's no one there, or it doesn't really matter really if there's a crowd there, because the stillness contains it, contains all these crazy things that we do.
What about things that might assist in our sense of being present now? What about, for example, different types of music? We were, after breakfast and I think washing up, we were listening to Diva Premal, one of these sort of, I call them a crossover east to west, beautiful singers.
Well, there again, I must allow that some people do indeed find music or chanting or, some form of rhythm or something is helpful. Speaking personally, it's never appealed to me. I'm used to the silence, or the natural sounds of nature, the barely discernible, here by the sea, the sound of waves. So I always like the phrase, to listen to the grass grow. It implies an openness of, I find no need to fill it with music. It always seems an imposition to me, really. I always rather questioned, Father was an artist and would sit in beautiful landscapes and paint it, and I never quite really saw the point why he needed to put a beautiful landscape onto paper. Why couldn't he just leave it as a beautiful landscape, and why did he have to do something with it? Well, I've got a bit more, perhaps, understanding of that now, and certainly wouldn't dismiss the meaningfulness of what he was doing, both for himself and other people. In his own way, it was as much a meditation as mother knitting, or indeed my own practice of meditation. But this human ego of ours has this insatiable desire to superimpose its own its own version onto almost everything, isn't it? To other people's ideas, even onto nature. Again, there's the phrase, to gild the lily, meaning to somehow improve on the natural decoration of a flower. I know some people love to do this sort of thing and produce their own lovely things. But personally, I prefer nature as it is, rather than embellished by man.
You took your sketchbook out with you the other day by the quayside. I wonder what you were sketching and how you found that helpful to being present.
Well, yes, I learned that from my father long ago. That especially if your mind's a bit agitated for some reason, to look at something can be, or the attention with which you look at something can be greatly strengthened by trying to draw it, or indeed to paint it, because it then makes you look more deeply and more carefully at at the wonder of what lies before you. You just try to follow a skyline or paint the outline of a rock, and you'll see things that you just don't see when you just look at it casually, even when you find something beautiful, because there are depths and depths of beauty and appreciation. And drawing and painting are wonderful ways of entering more deeply into where you are. In the now, of course. I mean, it's obvious enough, if you're not present now, you're not fully attending to what's there, are you? Father used to draw or paint as a way of relaxing. Very effective for him.
You came up with a poem in your meditation, or out of meditation this morning, John, which is a surprise for both of us, I think.
Yes, it is a surprise, isn't it, how sometimes these things pop up in the mind. We were talking with someone else, was it yesterday, about the words that sometimes come into our minds, we know not how, and how if we don't write them down, we lose them. Often they're rather good things, aren't they?
Would you care to share this morning's poem with us? I found it delightful.
Well, as usual, when a poem arises, I look at it a few hours later and think I might change a word or two. So I've not quite finally sort of settled. But it was meant to be it was a full moon last night, and there was a partial eclipse of the moon, so people were talking about it, interested. Anyway, I was sitting out on the terrace. I'd got my blanket around me and was all sort of tucked up, cozy, and then this thing came into my mind, and I of course I knew if I didn't write it down, I'd forget it. So I had to get up and take my blankets off and go back in the house and switch the light on, and then get all settled back again. And then of course I think, oh damn it, I wish I'd changed another word, but it's too late by then. Anyway. Like moonlight, a shadow deception, this world waxes, wanes, and passes from attention. True light, reality uncomplicated, watches, knows the vanity of passing shows. Well, brings us back to stillness, doesn't it? In which all things are contained, all the passing shows of this world, just contained. We don't have to accept or reject anything. Just let it be held in the greatness of being present now.